Following a meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, President Joe Biden has issued some pretty serious threats against Russia should it invade Ukraine. Now, following the meeting, he released a statement to the press. Let's hear what he had to say.
Meeting with Putin, I was very straightforward. There were no minced words. It was polite, but I made it very clear. If in fact he invades Ukraine, there will be severe consequences. Severe consequences. Economic consequences like none he's ever seen or ever have been seen in terms of being imposed. He knows his immediate response was he understood that, and I indicated that I knew he would respond, but beyond that, if in fact we would probably also be required to reinforce our presence in NATO countries to reassure particularly those in the Eastern Front. In addition to that, I made it clear that we would provide the defensive capability to the Ukrainians as well.
So what he's referring to there at the very end of the clip is additional defensive capability, because as you guys probably already know, the Congress has already allocated a significant amount of funding for the military in Ukraine. Now, what is this all in response to? Well, it's based on the intelligence gathering indicating that Russia is basically getting troops ready for a possible invasion. US intelligence has found the Kremlin is planning a multi-front offensive as soon as early next year involving up to 175,000 troops, according to US officials and an intelligence document obtained by the Washington Post. According to reporters, almost half of the 175,000 are already deployed on the Russia-Ukraine border. And so as a result, there's a lot of tough talk coming from, yes, Biden, but also his foreign policy advisor, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, who said something, in my opinion, a little alarming during his press conference following that meeting with Biden and Putin. Let's watch.
Things we did not do in 2014, we are prepared to do now. Now, in terms of the specifics, we would prefer to communicate that directly to the Russians, to not negotiate in public, to not telegraph our punches, but we are laying out for the Russians in some detail the types of measures that we have in mind.
So when he says that the Biden administration is willing to do things that were not done in 2014, what does that mean exactly? Now, we already know that sanctions were implemented, in the Trump administration. He's referring to the Obama administration's actions following the annexation of Crimea. And I don't know exactly what he's referring to there. He's being vague and he refuses to negotiate publicly. So in other words, why hold a press conference if you're not going to be specific about what the game plan is for the Biden administration? Besides which, I think it's okay to ask, why does the United States need to use resources toward this potential conflict when in reality we have our own issues at home, but also we need to find a diplomatic approach to that issue because we have this looming problem of climate change, and I don't really understand how the antagonism is going to make the situation any better. You get what I'm saying?
I do. But I have a different take on it. So one, I know how the antagonism could make it better, but if you're doing it ahead of time, like they are doing it now, I actually don't criticize anything Biden's been saying on this issue or his administration, because you want to dissuade them from taking military action. After they've already taken military action, then we only have a disastrous set of options. Okay, there are no good options after that. But I am 100% in favor of all the tough talk beforehand to try to basically let them know, hey, look, don't do it. Otherwise, there's gonna be big problems here. Because guys, it's not just about Ukraine. Although Ukraine is a giant country for Russia to take over. So that would already by itself be massively problematic, right? But if you let them take all of Ukraine, that basically means we're back to a world where everybody invades one another and grabs land. It's bedlam, it's chaos, and I know a lot of you won't believe it. And it's, oh yeah, what's the big deal? I mean, so Russia took a part of Ukraine and a part of Georgia, and now they're gonna take all of Ukraine. And look, Poland, it's not Germany, it's a middle ground. Maybe they take it, right? And so, but there's a lot of ethnic Russians in Poland. No, that's a disaster. No matter what we do, Okay, because I know that like there's people now in this country who are like, oh, we're the most evil thing on the planet and it's all our fault no matter what happens. Okay. I'm not talking about us right now. I'm talking about what Russia's doing. And what Russia, if lining up 175,000 troops on the border is a terrible development, okay? And Vladimir Putin is, anyone who trusts him is obviously the dumbest person on earth. Oh, I bet he has good intentions towards Ukraine, or I bet Russia should have Ukraine. I bet countries, semi-dictators like Putin should just take whichever country they like with force. And I hate our imperialism. I love his imperialism. That makes no sense at all. Okay, so now in terms of what we do, that is an incredibly difficult question. One I think is easy. Given the size of the massive violation of international law in this case, if they cross the border and actually try to take the country, obviously you freeze all Russian assets all across the world. I don't care who it is, every oligarch, anything related to Putin, seize. Now again, there'll be some idiots not idiots, to be fair, they're grifters, and I don't know who they're working for, some portion of them, but people pretending to be on the left, okay, and maybe a couple of people who actually are on the left and are, don't understand world politics at all, who are like, oh my God, freezing the assets of oligarchs. That's so warlike. Him taking Ukraine with 175,000 troops is not warlike, but freezing their assets is? Are you insane, right? So, and what about the people of Ukraine? Do they count? Are they human beings? As a progressive, do you care about them? Do you care about their freedom? Do you care about their rights, right? So now once you get beyond freezing the assets, that's when it gets impossible.
Right.
Because what are you gonna do, start a war with Russia? That's beyond a disaster. On the other hand, what are you gonna do? Let them take one country after another, after another? If you don't stop them in Ukraine, and I don't, again, other than freezing assets, I don't know how you stop them.
Right.
But if you don't stop them there, then this world is in a lot of trouble. Because I guarantee you, very soon after, China takes Taiwan. Because it's open season.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points. What stands out to me in regard to sanctions is, there's different ways to implement sanctions, right? And I like the idea of targeted sanctions rather than sanctions that would really be incredibly brutal to the people of Russia.
Yeah.
So for instance, here is, in my opinion, a pretty nuclear option. And so when Jake Sullivan is using that tough talk, but it remains vague about what he means, I'm not necessarily concerned about US troops on the ground in Russia. I'm concerned about them possibly implementing this option. So the New York Times seems to think that there isn't gonna be a military invasion. They write that with direct military intervention essentially off the table, Biden administration officials have listed a series of options that include financially punishing Putin's closest friends, which I'm in favor of, and supporters, blocking the conversion of rubles into dollars, and pressuring Germany to block a new gas pipeline between Russia and Northern Europe from opening. Now that middle option, right? The conversion of rubles to dollars, that could have an insanely negative impact on the people of Russia. I'll give you more details on that in just a second. In regard to sanctions or pressure toward European allies to halt any type of economic activity with Russia, including the transfer of fossil fuels, that's gonna be difficult, especially with a country like Germany that's kind of struggling right now. So for instance, work on that pipeline called the Nord Stream 2 has been completed, but it is waiting for approval from Germany's energy regulator before it can begin operating. Any request from Washington would coincide with a leadership change in Berlin. The new chancellor, Olaf Scholz, and his cabinet were sworn into office on Wednesday. Now, he has not yet made any definitive statements on that pipeline. Gas reserves are unusually low in Europe right now, and there are worries about shortages and soaring prices as winter approaches. So that pressure, to again stop economic activity between our European allies and Russia might be a difficult sell for the Biden administration. And so, I want to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, that's where I would get quote unquote super tough, right?
Well, it's Biden.
Yeah, so I know, right? Yeah. But this is a rare situation. There's only two situations where Biden is quote unquote tough, right? One is when you're talking about any kind of war situation. He voted for the Iraq War, and he thinks you remember, he's old school. He thinks I have to appease Republicans. So tough on drugs, tough on people who committed minor crimes, people that are powerless. He can be tough there. Tough against progressives, yes, right? Tough in these situations, yes, right? Tough when it actually comes to delivering for American voters, no chance, 0% chance, right? Tough against Republicans, negative 0% chance. There's no way he would ever do that, right? So, but there's different contexts definitely matter. So here, guys, look, I don't want you to mistake what I'm saying. I wouldn't, when I say, no holds barred, I don't mean you go after random average Russians and if they happen to have a bank account, although the average Russian doesn't have many bank accounts outside of Russia. But I'm not talking about that, obviously. I'm certainly not talking about Russian Americans. They're 100% American. That's never in question. But don't cry me a river about Russian billionaires and their assets being frozen. And then now getting tougher, I actually like these options that they have. So, because the thing you want to avoid at all costs is the military option. So, anything short of that is positive. Rubles to dollars, blocking that is super tough. That actually does affect the average Russian.
Yes.
And so that one's on the border, but
I haven't even given you the worst option yet.
Okay, but on blocking the pipeline, I would do anything and everything. If Russia crosses the border into Ukraine and it's an actual invasion, I would tell the Germans, we're going to put every tariff there is. Our relationships with you is going to be the same as Russia if you don't block that pipeline. We will end every economic situation we have with you guys, and we'll punish you economically as much as possible. We're not gonna let you build a pipeline with guys who are taking over Europe. That is obviously appeasement, and it will not be tolerated as long as it's on economic grounds.
So in terms of sanctions, right? Obviously the worst option would be a military intervention. We are not in favor of that. But the most extreme option in regard to sanctions is this. So it's a measure that would be to cut off Russia from the system of international payments known as SWIFT that moves money around the world, as was done to Iran. And by the way, that has been brutal to the people of Iran, and I'm not in any way in favor of it. In 2019, the Russian prime minister at the time, Dmitry Medvedev, labeled such a threat as tantamount to a declaration of war.
You know what's tantamount to a declaration of war? Lining up 175,000 troops on a border. That's not just tantamount, that's like minutes away from doing it. Look, guys, there is one scenario here where the Russians are doing something understandable, okay? That's where they line these guys up because it's a giant threat, obviously. And then they go, we'll walk them back if you guarantee that Ukraine will not be in NATO.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that's a huge part of the story I was going to get to next. And so Russia argues that the behavior of the United States and its NATO allies have been provocative, working to make Ukraine a NATO country in Russia's mind is provocative. And so it's a little bit of a he said, she said type situation, or he said type situation, where the United States is arguing, hey, lining up the your military at the Russian-Ukrainian border is incredibly provocative, and Russia's responding back and saying, well, your behavior with NATO is provocative.
Yeah, it is slightly provocative, the way we keep expanding NATO right up to their borders. Is it worth Russia actually going to war? No, but at the same time, if they're threatening it just so that we guarantee that Ukraine does not join NATO, well, I get it. That's a foreign policy maneuver. No one in Washington would say that. They would say, oh, that's outrageous, we hate them. They have no right to anything, we have a right to everything, right? No, I don't agree with that. That is, in some ways, American imperialism. I think the expansion of NATO is a complicated issue, and it definitely has some upsides, and obviously it has drawbacks. But if Russia's using this as a negotiation ploy, and they actually back down after they get some diplomatic goal that they were going for, at the end of the day, that's no big deal, if you ask me, right?
Yeah.
And any kind of tough talk, if they reach a deal like that, then tough talk about how we should still punish Russia doesn't make any sense at all, right? As long as everybody keeps it diplomatic.
Yeah.
But the minute that we allow countries to take other countries, it's gonna be an absolute disaster. And anyone who tells you otherwise, like, oh, what's the big deal about Ukraine? Well, they're not. Well, let's put it this way: that is definitely not a progressive position to say who cares about an entire country.
Right.
We should let another country basically take them over and impose a dictator to rule them. That is as far away from a progressive position as you can imagine. The fact that it's Russians and not Americans doing it does not make it any better at all. It doesn't make it 1% better.
Right. I think, and look, I get the hesitation with the United States getting involved because the United States, historically speaking, does not get involved to make matters better. And so again, I get that hesitation. But overall, I agree with your assessment there. It would be a disaster if Russia did that.
And you know when the US is lying, or at least we know. Like, so when the US is like, oh my God, Venezuela and Iran are the two countries that are the most dangerous, also have tons of oil, or in the top 5 oil producing countries, right? And but there's like 90 dictators in the world, but those 2 are the ones we are most concerned about, right? But the US does not, like, US likes to start conflicts with countries they think they can decimate, right? Not with other countries that have nukes and would start a cataclysmic war. Even the US is not that crazy. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.